I thought I'd like to share a few views that might help explain a few things about what I think is going on or has happened. Um, Vis-a-vis my own person as a um, person raised in America, mostly Pittsburgh and so on. Well, I think when you look at my relationship with the community, it should be kept distinct from, congressional attempts to understand the various coalitions that exist in the United States and the diplomatic coalitions that exist in the world. Because what was done to me was very unusual. And if you look at my community relations, you see one of the struggles of interpretation comes from Seattle defenders of the Jewish community who invent this idea that if I'm not in solidarity with them, I'm against the Jewish community. I'll try to explain a little bit about what that really means. You see, a lot of these girls who have come to the conclusion at the impetus of Paul McCartney, for example, that I was ideologically too different from what they looked for in an ideal Seattle boyfriend or an ideal Pittsburgh boyfriend negotiated with Seattle to be credited, and that therefore my relationships with Jewish girls could only be held against me by the terms advanced by the girls themselves. And many of these women are Clinton style liberated women. I think that shows you a little bit about the nature of the problem, because what we learned from examining what was done to me is that within the Jewish community, there are actually people who see the trauma of the Holocaust in abortion. So these women who are supportive of the Jewish community are aligning themselves with traumatized extremists. And it's hard to know how seriously these traumatized extremists take themselves because in their burlesque, they connected James' child to Wattenmaker. So the child is like a Zookeeper decision, a convenience, a cowardly act. Well, all of that is very harrowing. And to discover that it's been going on, that you use the child is something to think about. And I'm not sure that the loyalties are really where they should be, or the sympathies, I should say. But it was clearly very thought out. Now, the photograph, I'll call it the 6315 photograph that emerged of me, that did not emerge in a vacuum. It should have already been obvious what was being done. It emerged homeless, jail sentences, all sorts of things resisting their claim that I admit that the script that was imposed on me was the truth. So um, it advanced the military over the civilian prerogative, which is very questionable conduct towards a child. And they want what was known as the golden mean, the diplomatic lack of accommodation for extremes that Aristotle thought of, to be transferred into a golden bias whereby the guru, whether it's Trump or Paul McCartney, um, have license to do whatever they want to think of. So, and it's hard when you get into Seattle politics. I mean, they sort of decided that I think I'm special, so I'm not. You have to be careful of constituency builders who wedge themselves into a coalition that they want at the expense of the gold mean to be catered to. Henry Cabot Lodge was that way. Aaron Dixon was that way. No, although I don't appreciate the puns like poisoning me in my mouth, Odonsky, whatever the word for dental forensics is. I do think that um, the educational establishment needs to be held to inquiry about how the parallel development of the community college with its draft exemption and the war in Vietnam was connived as oppositional or potentially controversial moral arguments about what was true. And I think what happened was that back in the early days of the 20th century, Hollywood and the Ouspensky Circle had already decided what they were going to do. The World War I machinery, the fossil fuel industry, Reagan apparatus had already decided, with the help of behind the scenes people, like the famous alliance between Brezhnev and Chuck Connors, the rifleman. They decided to angry father us with a deluge. But they said, let's keep them talking, because the argument against doing that has always been if you explain what the consequences will be politically, not some guy playing the Old Testament father, but a secular decision maker. If you explain why freedom itself does not mean freedom from moral responsibility, for example, people won't choose accordingly. So they negate that. But the argument that they would have if they had echo C's explained to them in the 20s and 30s, gone along with, or at least the 60s and 70s, but they pushed the freedom modes with drugs and war and all of this. Said then we'll get the angry father and this sort of stuff. So I want to go a little soft on the rhetoric because I want to lay off the um, the intrusive martial elements that say that we're going to prove your words have consequences. Yeah, I'd rather soften the rhetoric so that we can discuss these things in academics. So, what I propose is a few of the things that come from um, my ideas of um, academic issues that are raised, you know, and as well as the political problems that come from who was raising the contrary. Now, I'm not pointing fingers at people who are violent criminals. I think we all agree with those people are wrong. I'm talking about people who believe differently than me and express openly, you know, in, who aren't afraid of academic discussion. Um, might derive as issues from some of this. Like, but the people who started really putting hammering on me about this, making it like an oil strike on a child who was tortured, said, we want your language. It would be like, suppose Arnold was a double agent, his father was in the Axis, and he comes along and says, well, I'll be darned, yeah. And everybody says, "Oh, that gives me goosebumps. He speaks just like Middle America. Why, that's our fatherland." And he conquers the world with a couple of changes of rhetoric to accommodate the urbane sensibilities of the people he's talking to. So linguistic anthropology as a strategy is certainly one consideration. Another thing that has to be, I think, disseminated to understand what's going on is the idea that we can't know God's will. Nobody thinks that we can. But some people believe the gospel or the Prophet Muhammad and so on, or how we go about interpreting, which is what Sharia means, what the will of God might be, or guiding us in the laws of man. I think a stable argument can be made that atheists should make the laws for the simple reason that we do understand each other far better than we understand the ways of God, and then put our trust in our best assertion of what keeps the peace between us and discuss these issues. So another thing that I think is important is understanding the difference between forensics and criminalistics because people get them confused. Forensics is the art of persuasion. So when they say Cyril Wecht is a forensic um, coroner, what they mean is he lies and lies and lies and persuades everybody that it's true. Criminalistics is the science of actually establishing what is true. So, there's certain issues that have to be taken into account when we look at what really is an ancient yearning of man to understand the ethics of what we consider virtue. If you achieve virtue, how do you behave? What does it mean to be a good person? Right? I don't think it's possible to turn all of this into a sports debate of win or lose. The issues are too abstract and complicated by presumptions. A good example is the idea that the Jewish community actually represents these girls who follow the golden bias in constructing a persona about me. That's I really have to take it easy on the rhetoric, but it does make me very unhappy. And I've lost a lot of my viability as a person from deafness, from compromised health, from you know issues attaching to me that are too heavy for anybody. I think that's the reason why it's kept so hush hush is that people don't want to have to admit that they inflicted something that heavy on a 9-year old. It I don't like to say it's disgraceful, but you know, I'd like to end on a happy note. I have a song you never heard. I'm gonna move back to Tipton, Tipton. I'm gonna move back to Tipton someday. I'm just kidding. It's just a song I like to sing. I love you, Tipton. That was a great experience. I'm so glad I got out there once.